Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet you. I think it's the first time that I see you and in 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 a session together with you. So it's really nice to get in touch with new people and new faces. And thank you. It's such a privilege to go first. Yeah. So. Prior to this session, Donata Francescata has circulated questions to be answers from the speakers. So what I know, this is the third roundtable on planetary roundtable. And okay, so to begin, yeah, I'd like to read aloud what I have written and then sent to Donata. So the first question is about which roles should community psychology play in different areas of our planet. So my answers, I'm answering this question based on my experience, my striving, and also my context. So I'm coming from Indonesia. Right now, I'm sitting in front of my computer screen from my house in the outskirts of Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. And yes, so it's about my experience, my contacts in Indonesia, being learning and being studying, doing research within the framework of community psychology in Indonesia. So to begin, I'd like to 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 give you a short description about how I got connected, how I got to know a community psych. So basically, I learned and got into psychology and social psychology before I got to know and interested in community psychology. And at the time, somehow I felt social psychology was, and I think still, is struggling to understand beyond group. Because I have been doing a lot of community works, community projects. So I felt at the time, when I started looking for something that is more connected, that is more relevant, I felt at the time social psychology failed to give me a good understanding about what happens beyond group context. Because community, I think, is a broader and wider in the sense that, in terms of the size, but also in terms of the dynamics. So when I finally found community psychology, I found that community psychology had a greater leniency towards the true ingredients of community: context, culture, power, ecological framework, and of course, the main construct of a sense of community do matter to understand a community. In that regard, community helps and navigates me to be in the two positions that I'm comfortable and like to engage. That is as an academic and a community practitioners. In community psychology, I found more epistemological diversity and plurality. That's what I like from community psychology, because in my experiences dealing with, understanding, and empowering multi-reality communities require a flexibility and require more than one way of knowing. I found that community psychology acceptance and utilization of qualitative research makes community psychology more community friendly. in my context, in my Indonesian context, community psychology offers both theoretical and methodological approaches that break the rigidity of the way mainstream psychology usually works with or works for its subject matter. And in this way, I see the role of community psychology as a breaker of rigidity, of status quo, and possibly the dominant. And more technically speaking, community psychology for me brings in approaches and tools or toolkit to do more progressive community research and action. So that's how I see the role, the important role of community psychology in the context of my work and also my society and community.
Thank you, because you will have a chance to talk again, but I'd like to hear now the other two from Asia. I would like to call to Soshi from Japan. Can you please talk?
Okay. Thank you, Katerina. So we're talking about the first question, the roles of the community psychologists playing in different parts of the world, in Asia. I'm a community psychologist the past 30, 40 years and spent half of my professional life in the US and the other half in Japan. And given that, I would say that the community psychology and community psychology practice have gone through many phases here in Japan, ups and downs. And I was here initially in the late 90s, where we had begun our organization. And today we had the annual conference today. So we were speaking, we were engaging in discussion this afternoon. So this is like a second time in this evening. This is great. I would say that the CP or CP practice here have not been very minimum in its impact. It's about a few years ago, the Japanese government authorized a license program to license certification in psychology, but they did not include a field of community psychology as a discipline. We've been listed under clinical psychology to help out the practice of clinical psychology. Currently, we have about 24 universities and colleges where they teach community psychology, but there is no standalone program in community psychology here in Japan. But still, at even the conference today, people thought that the community psychology is something that would provide assistance or technical approaches to the practice of community psychology, to clinical psychology. But to me, the community psychology represents a set of very unique value orientations, such as empowerment, collaboration, promotion of diversity, and all that. So it's been kind of we have a pretty good number in our organization. We had about 400 people in the Community Psychology Association here, but the majority are clinically oriented master's level members. So it's we have an issue of leading us into the next 40, 50 years, right? And so it's and most of the stuff we invited people from the US. The first guest was Ed Turkett, about 2002, who talked about the diversity, collaboration, and power relations. Unfortunately, it was poorly attended. And so Ed was kind of a lonely soul in this big conference room. And then given his untimely death a few months ago, I was reminded again of his passion for community psychology, and I started to reread most of his previous work. Right. So, as an organization, I think we need to be more up to date on the current community psychology practice. Because the first time the community psychology was introduced was the late 60s, where one faculty was right after the swamp Scott. He returned to Japan and then started a conferences. It was back in 60s. And since then, in 98, there was this new organization called the Japanese Society for Community Psychology, but it's not been much interaction internationally. So that's where we are now in Japan. And I started the small conference with Korea about 15 years ago, Japan-Korea seminar in community psychology. And it lasted for about 5-6 years. And other than that, I have the project, huge project with Korea now, but given the COVID, the field work has been pretty much interrupted. So that's where we're now in community psychology in Japan. So I will give this back to you, Katerina.
As that increasing sense of essential aloneness emerges.
Katerina, stepping out.
It allows that child to then begin.
I'm Donata, I'm not Katerina. Katerina is sitting next to me.
Okay.
She's here, but we're calling for the person from Hong Kong.
Empathy has the width of depth.
Wong.
Celebration of life.
Okay, then we can give the word to one of the people here, waiting for the other ones to come. Would you want to start, Maria? You have not talked yet.
It's very difficult. We're fragile, we're vulnerable, and we feel that struggle because we feel it on ourselves, and we have a common history.
Thank you for this invitation. I come from Portugal, and since 1987, we have been engaged in both scholarly and action in community mental health, in the integration of people with severe experiences of mental illness. And we have been discovering over these decades the power of community development, the basic and useful science for people and communities, and the causes that we have been mostly engaged in are homelessness and violence against women and the child sexual abuse. So in Portugal at the moment, there's one PhD program. People can get a doctoral degree on psychology with a specialization on community psychology. There are 2 master's degrees in different universities and over 30 courses of community psychology in different Portuguese universities. The challenge now is to keep that effort for the future. So we are very engaged in both having the discipline in universities, trying to reinvent itself. We are now also trying in the university to foster service learning programs and service learning courses. So we have our students engaged in our projects. Actually, for this conference, we brought not only a huge delegation of students, of PhD students, but also a master's students that brought their posters for the sessions and as results of the projects that we are engaged in. So we are trying to do our part to keep the discipline alive, to keep because it's a useful, very useful discipline for psychology, particularly with Donata's interest on climate change. We have a potential because people in communities are the ones who promote the change. And so if we are able to sustain our efforts and support people into a better living in their communities, we are able to support the challenges of the future. That was my message. Thank you.
And go back. Yeah. That is on the next slide.
Hello. I will make a quick note on the situation perhaps in the UK, where I'm currently based and working. So I'm based at the University of Brighton, where I'm the course leader. I coordinate the master degree in community psychology, which is currently the only master degree standing in the UK, still alive. We have very good engagement and participation, especially from foreign students. Now that the pandemic is over, we have again students coming from what we would say the global south, but I would just say outside Europe, from overseas. We have students from Latin America, we have students from Asia, I would say Japan, really a couple of students from Japan. We do have students from the US. Sometimes, yes, and we do have students from Africa as well, South Africa mainly, but we had a student from Nigeria, for example. So I would say it's usually a very heterogeneous group, not only internationally, so bringing definitely experience and knowledge from not the usual Western tradition, academic tradition, but bringing also lived experience that, as we say, we keep saying, it's very important. And I can see that from the students, and it's always relevant. I would like to say that another peculiarity of community psychology, that's the only note I will make about the UK in general, because I don't really want to speak to other realities, also because Brighton is quite peculiar compared to other towns in England. But the note I want to make is that community psychology, in spite of still being quite neglected at academic level, because it's not a degree course that generates enough business or is considered popular enough, in spite, as I said, being popular amongst students. It is usually, in the UK, we do have a strong component of clinical psychologists that are community-oriented, community-informed, to whom the values of community psychology are relevant. And so, although there is only a section in the British Psychological Society, is not a whole division, but the section is still quite active. And also in the clinical part of the British Psychological Society, there are a lot of clinical psychologists and psychotherapists that worked informed by a community psychology framework. I will finish just by saying it's a bit connected to what others have said about their experiences of community psychology in academia and where they are from. In Brighton, I have to say there is a strong connection between academia and the local communities, which is again a privilege, a pleasure to be a psychologist there. We do work, I have colleagues, I won't say myself, mainly colleagues that work at very different levels and with different groups. So especially homelessness, there are strong projects with participatory action research with homeless people, with the homeless, LGBTI plus community. There are colleagues who did a project in a queer pub as an informal therapeutic space. And we do have colleagues that work on the environment, not just climate change, but climate change paired with the peak of resources, the upcoming end of fossil fuels. So yeah, hopefully connects to the themes of the conference.
I want to ask a question, because the question was, in general, we have found up to now, talking to everybody, that there is some community psychology who are mostly activists because they think the country they live in has such an amount of poverty or domination or subjection of people to others that they are doing mostly that, and then they're doing research because they are almost all universities. And so they are not professional. And then there is the interesting thing that the North, in Europe too, is what you just said. There are a lot of clinical psychology. In Italy, it's true too. We have the majority is psychotherapists, but some are in the school I direct, they learn to be psychotherapy and community psychology, both. And so this is a real peculiar, more European attempt to integrate. I want to know if you think that too. Yeah, okay. You're not hearing. You're not hearing. Okay, I was just saying that the question I asked the people, the answer from Asia is whether they were playing more a kind of activist role, dealing with social problem. For instance, I am an activist of Friday for the Future, for the climate. And so in that role, I'm an activist. Then obviously I can do some research because I'm a director of a training program at the moment, and I was a professor for many years. But also I have done professional work. That means working with companies, working with firms, working with non-profit, working with all kinds of people who had problems. And I thought that was a part to empower and transmit some skills to people so they could take care of their problem themselves and use their wisdom and their knowledge better was what we do. But naturally, in Italy, what happened is that most people also do psychotherapy because the government does not have that many programs that pay for paid, and so they cannot earn a living being just the community psychology. So I wanted to know if you know somebody in England that earns a living being just a professional community psychology, because in America that happens much more, and also somewhere in Norway, for instance.
Probably the best name that comes to mind is actually Sally Zlotowitz and the group of psychologists for social change and psychologists against austerity. So there are a number of psychologists that are very strongly involved in political activism. But yes, they do both. I wouldn't say that they earn a living only by branding themselves and working as community psychologists, but they do the more standard one-to-one clinical work together with a lot of work. And I would say, yeah, they invest a lot of time, personal time and work time in doing community projects, and they end up with beautiful projects. And luckily, yes, they can make sometimes the headlines of maybe local papers, newspapers, or now social media, where they appear when something is not distorted as community psychologist. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Because the ones who do all three have complained they don't have time to do all three very well. The three roles of, activist, researcher and teacher at the university, and doer of projects take a lot of time. And some people have said, and I think it was you also that said that, so maybe you can talk about that, the difficulty of handling all three roles, which are, I think, obviously necessary, and we have to do them some, but the amount we do depends sometime on the context, and if there are some services that require, you can do it, otherwise it's kind of hard to do at the community level, policy level, for instance, if nobody invites you. So it's important. But I would like to leave you to talk about this because you already talked about it a little bit about.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Brodsky again. I'm based in Baltimore in the US. And it's nice to see, as it were, my colleagues from Asia. Hello to Toshi in particular. I spoke about it yesterday. Was it yesterday? Day before. So there's, the 3 planetary symposiums that have been happening. And I came back to mostly hear what was going on here, but as Donata pointed out, one of the points that I made is that we're trained to do any number of things, but any one person probably can't do them all simultaneously well. And so I was just noting that across careers, across generations, across settings and the resources that either enable or thwart certain actions, I think a lot of community psychologists find themselves focusing on one or two of these sort of three prongs that are part of Donata's question at any time: research, academic research / academic / teaching sorts of work, activism, and more community applied work that maybe doesn't take the activist change agent role quite the same way. And so I'm really interested in what our colleagues from other parts of the world are saying, because I think we are all facing the same sorts of dilemmas. Can you earn a living doing the part of it that you really love? I know in the US, a lot of people are also combining the activism may not be the bread and butter. Some other things are, whether it's administrative work or teaching work or community based work. So with that, I'll turn it back.
Okay, the second question that we wanted to discuss, and I like again to have our guest from Asia express themselves, is how are we doing enough to train the new generation, or are we preparing them? Because what happened in the other two meetings is we had a suggestion, a very interesting suggestion about this, 2 or 3 proposals. One was to create a mentorship, international mentorship. And so the people can study, let's say, in Jakarta, but can also have a mentor who is in England, or vice versa. And then other people suggested, especially the young one, suggested that they need to have an association of young community psychology, student and young community psychology. When I asked why you need this association, they said, well, because the young people today have many values of community psychology, but we think we can't, if older people remain, we are with the older people, we cannot express ourselves as much. So we like to have our own organization within the international organizational community psychology. And I thought that was an original idea. Then somebody else, I think it was you, proposed a junior year abroad, means not only a mentorship away, but somebody that can afford online, somebody said again, online or face-to-face to go sometime 2 months, 3 months in another country and stay in another program, which should be international connection. So what do you think about the way we are training now people at the university, and how can we change the training if in this direction, like some of the young people interview proposed, or some of them I know you already do it, for instance, in Portugal. So I give you the word to you, because I think Maria and Ornelas have done this international training within Europe. So, and here what they ask us is to make it planetary. So this is kind of a challenge.
We know that the Erasmus program has now a version that is Erasmus Mundi, which we should actually explore into these opportunities, because what we have been discovering is that through the Erasmus programs, we not only have undergraduate, but graduate and post-laureate students, particularly from Italy. And one of those students is here in our audience. And that is a particular kind of collaboration but we have to open the floor for opportunities. I usually say at the beginning of the year, I know how it starts, but I don't know how this is going to end. Because in the meantime, things happen and conferences happen, events happen, and people can actually do things in the communities, can be in international or national conferences. So our role is to open those doors for the students. If we do open those liaisons, create those generations will be able to take over. If we stick to the places and close up ourselves into our offices, we die alone, and it's not fun. So we learn a lot from, we now have students from Italy, from Brazil, from many different places like you in the UK. So, and that is the future, being able to be in these transnational grounds. And also just a peculiar thing, a detail, even if we speak Portuguese, the Portuguese is not the same. And there are tensions among the ways the Portuguese is spoken and written. And so what we have been doing with our students, that they assume that they're writing their thesis or the doctoral thesis, whatever they are writing, in, for instance, Brazilian Portuguese. So it's like an empowerment in the language level, because they understand as a microaggression that they are not able to express themselves freely if they're not speaking their natural language. So it's very interesting.
Can you express yourself also, because there was a discussion whether to do them online or in presence. Obviously, it's different between the two, but they were saying that now the reason we're doing this thing online is that so we can reach lots of people everywhere. And what they were saying was like, if we do it online, it always be present. You can always use it when and so I would like to also each one of you to comment how international you think it should be, the training, and how much online, how much in present, and what have you experimented with both of them?
I believe in blended experiences a lot. We can do a lot online, but it works better online if we know each other. So we have to have some sort of human contact, physical contact, and physical presence at a certain point, but then continue online. So these programs should have a physical exchange opportunities, but also the continuing ongoing monitoring and tutoring. And we need to change our ways of communicating through tutorial online lessons to speak less.
What do you think?
Well, this is where I'm actually very divided, because I mean, as an former Italian student, I benefited a lot from student exchanges, and I think it's a beautiful experience, very, very rewarding and enriching. But I don't think I can really now brand the UK as a very welcoming country for anyone, really. And it is actually difficult, especially in the post-Brexit scenario, to encourage student exchanges. Not that I'm not open to them, of course, but it can be tough. In terms of what is needed, I think that I would say mainly economic availability, and I would say professors availability. So by economic availability, I mean that one of the main challenges that I faced back then as a student, both undergraduate, postgraduate, and PhD student, and what I see in students now is obviously affordability. So being able to actually afford traveling abroad. And this is where paradoxically, even community psychologists can end up widening the gaps between those who can and those who cannot pay for it. So yes, it's amazing. I really love the idea, for example, of an international mentorship program where students can physically travel abroad. And but it's important that there is a solid fund to fund those who cannot pay for it. Because they may, we talk about meritocracy, either we believe it or not, but in terms of people who deserve it, for sure, there are many. Those who end up doing it because they can are much fewer. And
what about the online?
The online and presence is where I'm going to as well. As I said, I think the presence has an important value. I would say it's both, it has an additional experiential value, both as a physical space, because when you travel to a different country, you hear speaking a different language, you are challenged by speaking a different language, you have a different currency, whatever is a difference is challenging and enriching at the same time. And there is also the added value of the physical proximity, the physical closeness to either the mentor, the other students and your peers. However, I mean, they're complementary. Online, for example, obviously it can help building even a wider network. And for many reasons, there are a lot of students who cannot travel. So obviously for them, also being in an online environment can still expand their knowledge and their ability to be in touch with diversity of any kind.
You want to say something?
Yes, I want to summarize a point. After this COVID experience, we have now to take into account using a communication tool and even to develop competencies in using. We grew up during the COVID, and so in our team in Naples Community Psychology Lab, we have 3-4 people that are now really skilled. And I think that thanks to them, we were able to have the conference here using our own strengths. And so this is a competence to add, using Facebook, Instagram, Zoom, long distance communication, because that is a competence. It's not and it is a competence that young people have and older have less. But this is something to add in curriculum. Second, our international association have to find out way of communication, not only a piloting, but as a normal activity. And then, as they told, it is very good to have in presence and long distance and virtual communication. This morning, we brought some of you to the San Vincent Pier, San Molo San Vincenzo. You know, we can talk about this experience, but the feeling of being there in the sun, walking on the pier with the town in face of you, that makes sense. That is something that you have on your body. I don't know. We have Marina with us. We had Marcella, who never been there. They can say some words about their being there, of an experience they heard about quite a lot from us. So it is important to be there, to be in body. It is important to have exchange. And it is even important to be able to apply to system and to modify system of projecting, because there is the Marie Curie project, there are at European level the COST project, and with EFPA, it is the need to arrive to apply to the European Commission to give ideas for new projects, not to go to the bid, but to be involved when they ask suggestion for new project. And this is the first step to be able to be there. It is a decision point where to be and to bring ideas coming from nowadays experience. So just to summarize in a shape what we were saying this morning, adding our Italian experience of Community Psychology Lab of Naples.
That's a very good idea to inspire also the Commission suggestion, because in fact, the people who get lots of money are the ones from Holland and everyone. They just do it informally all the time. I want to hear you about this online face-to-face training, and then I would like to hear Soshi and the other one.
No, I think I agree with everything that's been said. There's some real economic and all sorts of real life issues that get in the way of getting together in person that we really need to take into account. And in the best of all worlds, our institutions would support these exchanges, and somehow they would understand that the gains we get from providing resources for someone to come to us are similar to the gains that one of our students gets by going to go somewhere else, and that it's a trade-off. But in the best of all worlds. And I think that the virtual world has opened up opportunities. I'm really struck by the opportunities that have been opened up also for people with varying abilities to access, to travel to. So there's still people who obviously don't have access to the internet and to those sorts of connections. But for many people who are kept out of things because they couldn't traveled to some place, or they couldn't get up the stairs, or they couldn't understand what was happening, there's all of these technologies that are available virtually, so that you have a whole community that was never had the access to many of the things that they did during COVID. So this really interesting opening up of the world that happened for some people, while for others of us it really closed down a bit. But I agree with everything that's been said. There's pros and cons to both, and certainly the in vivo experience makes all the difference in the world. If we can do that, I think we'll all get along better as well.
In Italy, I think was very interesting because I studied at the University of Rome in 1999 to use online, and I had a strong opposition from most of my colleagues. They didn't want to use it. First of all, because they didn't want somebody to see how they lecture, or, it was a question of privacy to them. And instead, with COVID, everybody was thrown to do it. And so now we're getting to the point that we're discussing here is, okay, what's good about online learning, what's not good? For instance, one thing that is very important, we found that you can really do collaborative working online. The collaborative, the technique and is very, very favorable for this. It's not just the Zoom rooms, it's lots of things together. But the other interesting thing about collaborative learning is that they learn from each other much more, because they can re-see all the work that they've done. See, everything being the best lecture, if it's not recorded, you only have notes. And we studied the difference in what note taking in the lecture, which was I'm laughing because one of the ones was my lectures. And when I look, I said, why have I changed the subject? And he said, well, a girl asked a question. I said, why didn't you write down the question? Oh, well, I got your answers. I mean, it was like, so the notes taking is very various. Instead, you can think about what you want, but when you're looking back, who did the work in this project, there you see everybody who entered, you see everybody what they said, what they did. And I found this to be extremely good for shy people who would never talk very much in a seminar face-to-face. And instead they produced the best idea in the ones online, because they could write a little thing there and somebody could say, oh, what Jenny said is not so bad. And this was very fascinating in terms of women and men dynamic, because in Italy, in the classroom, the majority of people who asked questions were males, being the minority in the class, but they had the guts to stand up. And this difference in gender really disappeared with the online, because they had the online, asynchronous. We use I can say, in my experience, what we're doing now is kind of complicated, because as you can see, one is not in. The other day, Rappaport got the wrong hour and missed this session. And so it happened all the time in the university. Okay, so, but what we used asynchronous meant we did, you gave a task and they had maybe 15 hours, 24 hours, 2 days to do it. So everybody could come in, and it's interesting. People came in after midnight, some of them, 3 o'clock in the morning. Some people 5 o'clock in the morning. Everybody had a kind of a star, but then when I asked later what they learned is that they're rereading what the others have written, gave them a lot of inspiration about how to do their work. And it was not cheating. See, it was learning from each other. And so I think collaborative learning, for instance, is easier online, because face-to-face, you are redoing now the same constricting situation of the classroom. We all have it together at the same time. Instead, online learning is not come l'hanno chiamato in Italia, like they called in Italy, a distanza, no? A distanza, perché a distanza means the teacher is always a person who is in charge, per cui è chiamata a distanza, ma in reality is focused on the teacher. Online learning, as he says, is focused on the student. And I think that's a major, important epistemological, but practical difference. But I like to hear now from the people who are online, which I like to see. What do you think about this thing, about helping the student online or face-to-face to make things more international? Toshi, are you still there? Can you answer me?
I'm still here. You talked about like 3 different proposals to promote that kind of student interactions and exchanges. And also Maria talked about the Erasmus program. That was great. Now, one other issue, the issues that above and beyond that is of course, the funding. The funding is okay, but something that once you get there, in vivo situation where you actually interact with people, one of the things I found is that once you are putting in there all by yourself, don't know what's going on, that is a problem sometimes. So what I've done in the past 3 months is I sent 1 graduate student to Hawaii, Honolulu. And one of the wonderful colleagues, not Janet Helms, Helms, what was her first name? Helms. She visited here a few times, so I know her. She identified a place for her to stay, real cheap, and found a project where she got involved. So that kind of connected, and she was able to see, she has never gone to work with the US community psychologist, but she was given a task of interviewing with people, and she still continues online, which she really appreciates. And so she will probably continue for another year to complete the project. And I'm a quantitatively oriented person, so she gets the qualitative experiences in Hawaii. That was great. So what I'm saying is that thinking about the student project, student mentorship is important, but I think it's important for us, the senior people, to connect well and to develop a good relationship, working relationship, so that when we kind of take our students over to Caterina or other places. So that's what I'm kind of not just junior year study abroad or mentorship, but it's something that a little bit more involved, something that maybe community psychologists would like to invent. So that's kind of my feelings about the
It's finally here. Welcome, Julian. I would like you to talk because you were supposed to talk already the other day, and we'll all hear me particularly. I want to thank you very much for being here because it's very early in the morning in Illinois.
That's all right. I've been up since Thursday waiting to get in here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you good. We see you good too.
Yeah. So I appreciate being here. And I've been trying to follow, but it's a little hard for me to figure out where is a good place for me to cut into this ongoing conversation. So if you give me a little direction.
Now you can talk and answer. You can answer the questions.
No, can I make a question?
Okay, but
him?
he has to talk about the questions first.
Yes, but
okay. You talk about what you wrote first to be on the topic, and then Caterina has a special question for
no,
you.
I have to help Steniqua. Julian, I have a question to you. There are some years that we weren't in contact with you, or only few of us were in contact with you. What do you think now about the ongoing community psychology starting from you such time ago? So you have some appreciation, some suggestions, some remark, some, you know, what is your feelings and what are your cognition in this time that went when you brought us into the community psychology?
So of course, you know, what we now know from if I went all the way back to when I started, which is, I was a graduate student in the 1960s when I first began to think about doing community psychology. There so much has changed. A major thing that's changed is happening right here. Initially, that whole field was, as far as I knew, or at least the use of the term, was entirely North American based, and it was based on North American history, experience with a country that's was having trouble and still has trouble with multiculturalism, and without any words to figure out how to engage people. And we also had very little ongoing contact internationally. So the most obvious thing that hits me trying to follow this is what a tremendous service meetings like this are, and what a great job you all have done in bringing together people from really all over the world with so many different perspectives and experiences, and having opportunities to share those experiences is so important, because it's very, community psychology has certain universal points to it that probably are true everywhere because of the relationship between individuals and social systems, and the problems of psychology being essentially a conservative field, and entering the basic psychology is all about making individual people feel comfortable, which is exactly in many ways the opposite of what community psychology wants to do. All over the world, we want to make people a little more uncomfortable with their place in the world, that does not include people different than themselves, and so on. So those kinds of problems exist in every country, but community psychology by nature just also has to be very local, because that's where people live. They live in the context of their local governments, their local religious traditions, their local ethnic and social relationships. And some places those are going to be more unitary, other places they're going to be more multiple. And so it seems to me that communication across national boundaries and meetings like this give people an opportunity to hear one another. And so that's one thing that's totally changed. The other questions that I had a chance to reflect on without really going into tremendous detail about them, the thought about the questions about intergenerational exchange. Well, it finally dawned on me how much I have learned from the people who had been students in the institution where I'd been working for 50 years. So a lot of individual students have gone out and created careers of their own in new settings, and many of them have brought new ideas to the field that would never have occurred to me when the field began. So for one great example, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but I had a student here who's currently in global studies at Harvard. Name is Joseph Gone, G-O-N-E. Maybe some of you have seen his work. Joseph is a Native American who grew up in a reservation context I don't want to give his autobiography. That's for him to speak of, but he brought to our field the first clear understanding I have ever seen of how helping programs designed with all of the best intentions can be so completely ethnocentric that even the concepts of anxiety, depression, trauma, which come from our own experiences in majority contexts in the US, how those are experienced and engaged so differently by Native American people. And so, you know, his work, Joseph is a very accomplished person. He can do any kind of quantitative analysis that you can imagine. He's a very, very talented person. But he also has an anthropological approach to doing his own work. And so he brought in narrative and qualitative research and has brought out through the stories of Native American people a whole new understanding of what it means to work with people who are not mainstream cultural US people. So some of the things that we learned from his work seem to me to be cross-international understandings, because if that's true, even within the US, it's got to be true across country contexts. So I've been incredibly impressed by how many people can think about themselves as being community psychologists in countries all over the world, in some ways seeing the world through the community psychology perspective, but all applying it in the context of their own locale. And so, you know, professionally, of course, we have a problem of figuring out how to communicate with each other, but it's really a wonderful opportunity. So meetings like this are amazing. I wish I had been able to come in person and be there. I think maybe I'll stop for a minute and just
we hope very much you come one day again. You know, your house in Rome is always there for you, and in Naples as well.
It's
you know,
beautiful.
we met him years ago, and we both all have wonderful memories of you, and we are very happy you're here. But as I was saying, it's not so bad to do it online, because in a way we are now able to answer immediately and be in all different parts of the world. So I was going to have the Soshi and the other, they were talked, but the guy from Indonesia has not talked about the thing about internationality that we're talking about. And I want also your opinion on this. We were discussing how best to train students then in this international world. And the other question is, how can we do? We have had some proposals, very interesting proposals in these 2 days about how to increase community psychology in the world. One was, and I want your opinion on this proposal, one is to work with training and more, and make more international training possible, online and face-to-face for students. So they are not just training one group in one country, but in multiple ways. That's the first idea. The second idea they had was to create for young people a separate association within community psychology, because they would like to start thinking on their own, like just what you were saying, like, and do things more on their own. And the third proposal was also to write, have a newsletter, an international community psychology newsletter, to be guested in one of the European, Italian journal, so that they have a kind of a newsletter, so that we can keep in between congresses notice about what we're doing. And another interesting thing was they proposed was that we create a planetary international community psychology, not society, but just network. And so that we can have what they called international mentors for students. What do you think about this idea, Julian?
Well, I think they're all sensible. They range from being sensible to exciting, and so they're definitely good ideas. The sort of one of the problems that I think we have in a field such as this is combining our own work and communication with maintaining. Everybody needs a base of which they can work. So we need to have spaces that are legitimated somewhere. So if we're at a university or in a human service agency or in a government group or in the private sector, we all need to have a base of operations, and that means that those bases will have cultural expectations for how people behave and for the issues that they raise and that justify them having a space in their own local community. So we have to be able to simultaneously be legitimate in some places as well as with one another. One of the things that I learned a long time ago was that I could meet people. They did not have to be psychologists to be community. I would usually refer to them myself as community, whatever they actually were, whatever they actually operated out of, whatever discipline. So I could meet a sociologist, a lawyer, a physician. There are people in every discipline, with every training, who have a community perspective on the world. And to me, that's where we learn from each other. I found that I was less successful, actually, or less. Let me go back and say it a little bit differently. I think that it's important for each of us to maintain our own legitimacy within our own discipline or profession, while at the same time meeting people who are in other disciplines and other professions and finding ways to work together to influence one another. And what I often found was the people who thought of themselves, what I would say, as community oriented, those people are almost always thinking of themselves as borderline in their own field. They were not center mainstream psychologists, sociologists, philosophers, physicians. Yes, they were all in those fields and they had managed to develop legitimacy within that field, but none of them, I found, thought about themselves or indeed were at the very center of that field, period. They were all somewhat unhappy with the limitations of their own field. So they thought about themselves as what Jim Kelly referred to as crossing borders. And so borders are not just physical things, they're also psychological, intellectual things. And so any mechanism that helps us to cross the borders of our own isolation seemed to me like good ideas.
Well, that's what we have been trying to do in Europe. In Europe, we've tried to develop what we call a blended method. They integrates both the activist role that sometimes you have to play. For instance, me, at 78, you know what I'm doing now? I am in Friday for the Future with my husband, Bill. We are the grandparents because they have the students and the parents, and we are the grandparents. And they had a big yesterday, they had a huge, and I was very proud that here in this conference, there are lots of things on community climate change. And there was nothing 3 years ago. When I first did, thanks to Maria and other people that invited me to do a webinar, because it was, COVID and we all were sitting in the house. And I said, what I think now is the most important problem is climate change, because we are risking to ruin the earth for our children and grandchildren. And so this, and I don't know how much we're working, but here in this conference in Naples, there are at least 6 or 7 roundtables, researchers done. This morning, I listened to some research, and I was particularly proud because here I have my husband, who is a energy saving, and my daughter, who did the research on how to teach students. So I think I'm happy for my sister, who has been an activist, which we never listened to for years, and she was right. You know, we always said we have human problems to watch about, and she'd say, "Yeah, no, this problem is ruining everybody, including the humans." And I think for me, what the roles that is more activist has to follow in each region according to the crisis of their region. But now we have a planetary crisis that perhaps can unite us. Because I think one of the problems we have in Italy certainly, is that we're going to have election tomorrow, and we are so divided that some people can't even think that the other person is going to win without, you know, being very frightened that we even lose democracy. So we are very polarized. And I think one of the important things of community psychology is building bridges and not creating divides, which identity psychology has done. You know, it's very important to fight for rights. I was a feminist fighting for women's rights, but I realized, and that's why I went into Friday for Future, that instead we have to get together, women, men, old, young, and everybody, because we are now facing an emergency in our life, our common life. What do you think about climate change? I wanted to know this from you.
You're asking me about climate change? I don't know
Yeah.
anything about climate change except what I read in the paper.
But
How's that for an honest answer? And of
Okay.
course, no, you know, it's a problem. It's a worldwide problem. Whether psychology has anything to say about it, I don't know. Psychology may have something to say about how people communicate about climate change and how people work together or don't work together. But about climate change per se, I know zero.
I know, I hope I get you some, you know, what we're doing project is like community psychology in increasing the awareness of the problem. Because, you know, some people don't want to know about the problem and therefore they deny still. And most politicians don't do it because they receive money in America from the oil guys. And so they are in, or some males are too much war prone, like Putin, but this is a European tradition to be, comes from Iliade. In Italy and in Europe, we have a tradition of valuing males warriors. The glory of narratives for them, they have in the epics. So we, as psychologists, have a big deal to be able to help people change also their minds and their behaviors. That's why I think it's very important now that we do these things internationally. That's why I promoted this, to understand that we have some problems in some areas which are specific to this area, but we have now 2 or 3 problems which are, you know, the inequalities, social inequalities, the way we treat the indigenous people, and obviously climate change. Because climate change become worse, you know who's going to suffer more? The poorest people, the indigenous people. They're already suffering more. This year in Italy, 10 people died last week and 6 million are without house in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. So I think the community psychology should become more aware of this and take care of this problem. So I'm trying to convince you too, but.
Well, I don't misunderstand what I said. I wasn't saying I think it is a major worldwide threat of existential proportions. But the fact is that my knowledge of exactly the science of climate change is not something that psychologists know much about. What we know about is how people communicate and how we can influence one another, and the way we can, you know, we could look at the social psychology of what makes something a social issue. And, you know, it's clear now that climate change has finally become legitimated as a genuine social issue. So that brings psychology and other social science fields into the game, once it's viewed as a social issue, then we do have legitimacy to say something about it. But getting it to become a social issue, that comes usually from other places than from psychology. I'm just still stuck with the fact that psychology as a basic discipline at its heart. I don't know about anybody else here, what kind of training they had as an individual, as a psychologist, but my own experience with psychology has been that it is a very conservative field. Psychologists typically are not on the forefront of identifying social issues and working for social change, except for social psychologists, very small portion of them, community psychologists, who are actually a small proportion of the total number of psychologists. So we have to be both optimistic, energetic, communicate with other like-minded people across the world. And at the same time, we need some level of modesty about exactly what our own ambitions can be. We have to contribute to coalitions of people, and they're not all going to be psychologists. They're going to be from all kinds of fields, and some of them may not even think of themselves as social change agents. They might just think about themselves as businessmen or government officials or public servants. And we have to be able to work with all kinds of people who have different frameworks than we have. So to me, I don't think we should overclaim expertise, but at the same time, I think we should offer our own work, involve our students in social issues as much as we can, and legitimate for them those activities. So of course, I'm concerned about how we can contribute to whatever it is going to take to improve our handling of environmental problems. But I think it would be absurd for me to presume that psychology is going to be the basic field that will solve that problem. It just doesn't make any sense to me. That's not where it's going to come.
No, but it's not that what I said. What I said that we're doing in Italy is we are collaborating already with lots of professionals. It's been the novelty of European community psychology. We have been working with architects. We've been working with energy experts. We've been working in this kind of problem forces you to deal with other professions. We always said that, at least in Europe, it's always been interdisciplinary discipline. That's one of the difference between America. For instance, one thing that I felt, as you know, I was trained in America. When I came back here, I realized I had all in my training, which was understanding through multiple facets. And we created in Italy one of the first instrument, which is community profiling, for compelling people to look at their community from 8 points of view, going from the demographic to the anthropological. And I think this has been the beauty of European community, because European community is not made on the self-made man myth of America. We are made on the myth that if we fight together for something, we get the rights, because that's our history, in the oppression we have had also in Europe. And so I think it's changing. What I think, I'm just telling you this to say, in different parts of the world, people have made progress. For instance, in South America, South Africa, they taught me how to understand colonization and oppression. Because I really understand, even as a feminist, I understood what was male-female oppression. But here in Europe, we have done some other thing, which is because we are, as you can see now, we are in a war and everybody's trying to help Ukraine, but actually we are already divided, because Europe is the best example of multiple languages, multiple and same values that we try to put together. So I think you're right. We can only. There are some people that want to say something. Oh. There are 7 interventions. Okay, then give me the word. You got some people interested, so they want to talk. Thank you, Julian. I was so happy to talk to you finally that we gave you a little bit too much time, but You deserve it. I mean,
No, we have climate psychologists in Germany and Austria, and also the environment psychologists
see, we got them.
in America. But the essential is to collaborate all over the discipline, especially community and environmental psychologists. That is Cornelia from Wien.
We know. Ciao, Cornelia. We know.
Somebody else that said something. Vuoi far scorrere
That's Cornelia.
vuoi far scorrere la chat? Enzo.
Ma chi vuol parlare adesso? Cornelia, do you want to talk now?
Like coming from Sosh,
On mute.
like
Do you hear me?
Tosha ha già parlato.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
I
can hear
checked.
you.
Okay, I'm in the train. That's the problem. So I cannot speak so loud, but I'm really happy turned out that you combine environmental issues with community psychology issues. And I think it's we should work much more together in this fact, and we should start to combine much more environmental psychology theories, and for me always community psychology is interesting because you are always more hands-on. You always work together with different kinds of persons and people, and yeah, for me it could be the first step, but we do it since 50 years, try to connect more, try to make more networking. We have to go on. I think we don't have to stop. I don't know if you could hear it. I make a chat.
Thank you, Cornelia. Can I go back to Julian or somebody else who was on the panel? Can you please connect me one of the people on the panel? Julian, you still there?
I'm here. I can't hear what's being said now, however.
Oh, no, because somebody's talking. Cornelia, with Cornelia, you have to get off. Ciao, Cornelia. You have to get off the microphone, otherwise I can't talk to other people. Baci, baci. Okay, give me back Rappaport, please. Ah, we have to close, okay. Well, we are 1 minute after that. 2 minutes, I want to say goodbye to all the panelists who are here and the ones who are there. So Cornelia, ciao. And I hope to see you in person soon. And Julian, can you still come or no and say something?
Can I? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Okay, finally got you.
Are you asking me something?
We are just greeting each other, making a final comment.
Oh, well, what I want to do is apologize for not being here earlier and cutting in here off the top of my head with some random comments. That's all.
No, but we had something interesting. See, you got everybody in the environmental field telling you that we should work together as community psychology.
That's great. I hope we do. Working together, that would be the key to me, not us working on our own. No,
nobody can work anymore on our own. We know that. But thank you very much for waking up so early. Have a wonderful day. And I hope that we can do it again, okay? I'm very happy you like this kind of stuff. It was a lot of work, as you saw, just sending letters back and forth.
I think you deserve a lot of praise. I know you're not asking for this compliment, but I think you deserve a lot of praise for pulling this thing together with people from all over the planet. So thank you.
Thank you. Because I'm 78, you know, and pretty soon, it took a lot of work for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And I think, and I hope to see you soon sometime. Ciao. Okay. Caterina and I are very happy you're here.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good day. Goodbye, everybody.